Hey gang, this week's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Hey, buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. With killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app now, create an account, and use code GOODSEATS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code GOODSEATS for $20 off. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Download Game Time today. And now, here's our show.
I wish that I can go back and play against Australia, you know? You can't change anything on the internet. It's still going to stay in the record for a long time. It's embarrassing, you know?
I was there when Australia beat us 30-0. 30, I think 30 or 31, I'm not, but I know it was 30. The boys, they got the hearts. I know they not really have the skills and everything, but they got the guts.
We're always the underdogs, and we always will be until we prove them wrong.
They needed 9 goals today. You gave them only 8. It's a step. These are steps. Steps all going in the right direction.
I played with George Best, Johan Cruyff. I coached several MLS teams.
Thomas is a real professional, high-level coach.
Go! Pressure! Fight Dala! Go, Buddy!
He's tougher.
You're playing yourself out of the starting 11 right now. If you're not going to be mentally tuned in, you're a risk, man.
When he get here, Thomas was a very difficult person to deal with.
You brought me here to put a winning team on the field that don't interfere.
I told him, if you don't like it, you just pack your things and go back home.
I got a man that's really discovered she has more female tendencies. The goalkeeper, the only guy that wasn't at 31-0 loss. There's scars with this team.
All right, here we go. Only coming up. Hard draw. Knees up. Come on, 50. Come on, 50, baby. Come on. Woo, I like it. Red card.
Soccer has become cynical and big business, and I don't want this to happen here. These guys play because they love the game. They get zero, nothing.
I'm here to play for my country, represent, do my best on the field. You know, I'm here for the love of the game.
I'm just trying to prove we're not the same team anymore. I want to win a game. I would die as a happy person.
To play in a World Cup qualifying game, the biggest sporting event in the world, and you guys are part of this. Wow, that's pretty cool.
American Samoa Warriors, show me how to fight. I'll show you how to win. Come on. This is Buffalo! Well done. I just shit myself in my pen, seriously.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
Oh my goodness, can you feel the excitement? Well, it's coming at you. Here we go. My name is Tim Hanlon, of course, and this is Good Seats Still Available, the curious little podcast. As always, devoted to what used to be in professional sports. I appreciate you coming on by. Thanks for downloading us, ingesting us, putting us in your earbuds, however you're mainlining this week's festivities. And buckle up for excitement, because here comes our guest this week, Thomas Rongen. And if the name is familiar, you are probably a fan of the sport of soccer in the United States or on the global stage or some combination thereof. But I think, frankly, the debate will be, geez, how do I know this guy, Thomas Rongen? Well, we're going to get into that polyglot, shall we say, or multichromatic story as to the various stops in the professional playing and coaching and otherwise managerial and senior management world of professional soccer in our conversation coming up. But I think the broadest number of people, those who are maybe sort of passingly interested in the sport of soccer, not necessarily diehard fans, may know the name Thomas Rongen from the exploits in the film from which you heard that clip at the beginning of this show. The film in 2014, from where that clip came from, was a documentary, a British documentary called Next Goal Wins. It is a phenomenal film, one that must be experienced and enjoyed and found as quickly as possible. It's hard to get. It's hard to find these days. I think you have to go the DVD route or perhaps your local library, because I know it's sort of not on any of the major streamers as of current recording of this episode in June 2023. But I think that's for a particular reason. Let me explain. Next Goal Wins is about the national soccer team of American Samoa. And it is their attempt, as they are known as being, frankly, one of the worst or weakest soccer clubs in the world, in their attempt to qualify for the 2014 World Cup, the FIFA World Cup. And at the time, this was a team, American Samoa, that had been regularly thrashed by even the smallest minnows in the FIFA world rankings hierarchy. For a matter of fact, in 2001, American Samoa lost to Australia in a World Cup qualifying match by a score of 31-0, which I think still stands as the worst loss on the international stage, soccer-wise. I'm not positive of that, but I think that is still the case. And who was recruited during the qualification? This is circa, 2012 or so, 2013, to basically rehab this team and perhaps bring them to some level of respectability, perhaps maybe arguably not qualifying probably for the final, the finals of the 2014 World Cup, but at least perhaps being competitive in some of the qualification rounds. One Thomas Rongen. And the story of Next Goal Wins is the sort of incredible journey, as you can sort of hear bits and pieces of in that clip, of what transpired. Now, the reason, so the movie, ultimately, you must get and watch and enjoy. It's fantastic. Arguably one of the best soccer documentary movies, frankly, ever made. Let's be clear about that. But I think the reason why it's hard to find at this moment as we're recording is because, wait for it, the movie is being made into a dramatic / serio comic feature that's coming out later this year. Not exactly sure when. Certainly, I think in the fall is probably a wise guess. And the movie, again, is also called Next Goal Wins. And this time, instead of it being a documentary, it is stocked full of amazing performers, an Academy Award-winning director, Taika Waititi, and the role of Thomas Rongen being played by one Michael Fassbender. I mean, this is a guy who's been in amazing stuff over the years. Elizabeth Moss is in this. Oscar Knightley is in this. Will Arnett makes an appearance in this movie, among others. I don't know if it's star-studded, but it's certainly it's stocked full of very talented actors and those who have been waiting perhaps to see this story in a more dramatic form, serial comic form. Well, your wish will be granted later this year. And boy, talk about a story book ending or sort of a coda, I guess, to this amazing story by itself, now being made into a major motion picture, which, perhaps has some Oscar worthiness to it come next year. This is the life of Thomas Rongen. And this is just literally one part of it. If you're a soccer fan of any sort of substance, in past history or perhaps even of today's action, if you're a fan of today's game, you probably know him from his color commentary for the Inter Miami team in Major League Soccer. You've seen his work on various national networks, the Goal TV network, etc. But if you go into the Wayback Machine, as we will do quite a bit in our conversation coming up in a few moments, you will know, remember, and revere the great Thomas Rongen from his playing days with AFC in the Netherlands, but in the United States, in the old North American Soccer League, with the LA Aztecs, with Johan Cruyff, the Washington Diplomats, also with Johan Cruyff, the Fort Lauderdale Strikers with George Best and Ray Hudson and a whole bunch of other memorable players. The Minnesota version of the Strikers, both outdoors and indoors. the Chicago Sting in the indoor MISL. Yes, they were an NASL team, but don't forget the Sting converted into being a full-time MISL team. He was on that team in 85 and 86, that season. And various incarnations of the American Soccer League that happened after the North American Soccer League. And when his playing career was done, he went into the managerial ranks by being a coach of the Fort Lauderdale Strikers of the American Soccer League, I think the third version of the ASL. But also when MLS sort of came onto the scene, here was Thomas Rongen. He was one of the original coaches in Major League Soccer, first with the Tampa Bay Mutiny in 96. He became the second ever coach of the New England Revolution, and then the second ever coach of DC United from 99 to 2001. He was also, for you nostalgists out there, and Pablo Mara, this is for you, 2005 was the coach of Chivas USA. You remember them? The American Samoa thing came around in 2011, 2012 or so. But Thomas Rongen has had quite the life, and then some. He's been part of the United States national coaching apparatus, the under-20s, a couple of different stints there, and is very active in the game still today. And as you'll hear in our conversation coming up in a few moments, has the gift of gab, shall we say. So we are going to have a wonderful chat with the great Thomas Rongen, a bucket list conversation for sure. And it is coming up in a moment's time. Please stay tuned for it. You will enjoy it. I virtually guarantee. Quickly, though, before we get there, I want a quick shout out to our friend Dean Mitchell at sportshistorycollectibles.com. Promo code GOODSEATS for 15% off all of your purchases. Again, at sportshistorycollectibles.com. And there's new stuff all the time. This is the better, well-lit, and more guaranteeable, I think, version of eBay when it comes to sports collectibles. And the specialty there at sportshistorycollectibles.com is, in our realm that we love and cherish, stuff that's not around anymore. Leagues, teams, people, all kinds of stuff related to that. And that could be programs, that could be media guides, that could be cards, that could be pennants, that could be a whole raft of stuff. Check it out and bookmark the site and check it out often. Will you? And write down this promo code, so make sure that you get that you get your discount, you get your money off, for God's sakes. Again, it's sportshistorycollectibles.com. Check them out, and don't forget to use the promo code GOODSEATS for 15% all of your purchases. You'll be glad you did, as they say. All right. You'll also be glad that you did stay around for this conversation. The one, the only, Thomas Rongen. It was a blast, a pleasure to have him. This happened about a month and a half ago. Please, as always, enjoy. The matter at hand right now is you're gearing up for round two, I think, of Stardom, albeit a bit indirect, with the fictional version of Next Goal Wins. You must be excited that this documentary from 2014 is being, if you will, remade into a full-length feature film now.
It certainly is. It's one of those badass moments, where you get an answer to a question. Who should play me in a movie? Well, it's the Oscar and Golden Award winner Michael Evan Fassbender, who happens to be Magneto, a Spartan warrior, portrayed Bobby Sands, Steve McQueen, and Steve Jobs, and he's portraying truly yours, Thomas Rongen. Yeah, that's a pretty special thing at my age to be able to see this unfold, which has unfolded for several years due to the 2014 documentary. And I mean, I can't be happier that somebody like Taika Waititi, who's won, Academy Awards and Grammys as well, a guy that's in 2022 is one of the 100 most influential people in the world. And when he watched Next Goal Wins, he actually got my phone number, and he says, I'm going to turn this into a full-fledged movie. I love underdogs. Most films are about people who live on the margins or a little bit left out. He's going back to his Polynesian roots. He's from New Zealand. And I'm sure it will be like a heartbreaking comedy drama. Like, think of it like Ted Lasso meets Cool Runnings by the way of the Mighty Ducks, with Waititi's distinctive brand of humor. So I can't wait. There's a lot of things unfolding in the next few months that I can't talk about, but it's fun times, no doubt.
Yeah, I would imagine it's also a bit surreal because it's somebody else portraying you, and you're very much still alive, and obviously are known personality on a lot of different fronts, right? So a lot of people who know you already, especially from the realm of soccer, and including that documentary in 2014, right? The first thing they're going to have to do is sort of suspend disbelief, if you will, and take what they know of you and your personality and your visage, and put that aside to let him do his acting work and then the rest of the story as well. So that'll be fun.
It will be interesting to see because Michael Fassbender is not known for his comedies. So this is a real challenge for him as well, and the script was written by Taiki and also by Ian Morris, the In-Betweeners. You got Will Arnett from Arrested Development. Elizabeth Moss plays my wife. Oscar Knightley, the Duck Rockers, Rhys Darby, David Fane, and he's got quite a few Polynesian stars in this movie as well, because that was important to him. And yes, it was nice to see the build-up, but I never really got a sense of, okay, this is going to happen till I watched the trailer. And in fact, Thomas is the first thing I hear. Rongen, I hear in the trailer. So in fact, my name will be first and foremost in front, played by Fassbender. So it's finally taking root, and I can't wait because it's. Let's be real honest. This is, and Taiki said to me as well. This features a rare mix of soccer and transgender identity. A subject that's still very much taboo in the sports world. And previous Waititi projects prior to these big ones praised him for his approach to sexual identity, orientation, and it's reasonable to expect that this movie will handle this subject lightly, but with and respectfully as well. So I can't wait really for all the things I just mentioned. Outside the fact that Fassbender, there's some very interesting storylines in this that will really hit home in the modern world, so to speak.
Well, regardless, congratulations on the story being worthy of that. But look, I would also say too, frankly, for anybody who's listening, the 2014 documentary is in itself, I think, exquisite, well done, handling the various topics and themes in this, your personal journey, the transgender issue, the player that revolves around just the sheer excitement, heartbreak, and renewal, I guess, of the team and soccer. I mean, all those things. With all due respect, I didn't think the documentary could do the story much better, but double strike extra for a theatrical movie, perhaps for a wider audience. So I hope the halo for you continues.
And give those two young English, directors and producers that were there before me on the island, Mike Brett and Steve Jamieson, who put the documentary together, who got 100% approval ratings on Rotten Tomatoes, crowned Best Documentary at the British Independent Film Awards, Tribeca Film Festival. It got a lot of great rewards and great reviews, obviously. And I'm sure if there's one that could maybe take a sports documentary and turn it into a movie and do it well, it's Taiki, but it's not an easy task. And I can't wait how this unfolds. And he did talk to me a few days ago and said, the Nicole story, the death of my stepdaughter, is going to be very much part of this movie as well. So he's got some tricky things that he had to navigate, but he feels good about it. So yeah, let's move on.
Well, the fact that you're involved in the process is even better, because there are plenty of situations where directors and whatnot move forward and stuff. So, all right, well, best of luck for that. I know you're going to be talking about it ad nauseum in many other places, and we will promote the heck out of it for sure. But let's go to the beginning, if you will. So, All right. You're a young soccer player. You're playing in Holland. You're obviously in European soccer, which is a whole different thing back in the 70s. How the hell does this North American Soccer League thing hit your radar?
It didn't really hit my radar till talking about probably the last century. The three most influential people on the football inside are probably Rinus Michels. And although Johan Cruyff gets credited for total football, it was Rinus Michels, the Ajax coach, the great successes in the late 60s and 70s. The 74 World Cup obviously put, total football, Clockwork Orange on the map. Michels goes to Barcelona, takes Cruyff with him. Continue with all the players that followed Cruyff and became coaches. Pep Guardiola, the most important one, obviously. So in 1978, I played for the Dutch. At that time, was called the amateur team, and it was not. It's the Olympic team, and we played the U.S. Olympic team in 5 different cities. We played the same team in 5 different cities in '78. San Diego, San Francisco, St. Louis, DC, and New York. And while I'm flying back, and another one, our normal head coach became sick. So Rinus Michels, who was just on the verge of going to Barcelona, had spent some time again with the Royal Dutch Soccer Federation, decides to go on this trip. And I'm flying over the Grand Canyon, and he's sitting next to me, and it's the general. I'm nervous. This is my, Cruyff is my idol in terms of playing, in terms of coaches. That was the guy. And he said to me, how you doing? And I said, well, I'm in last year of my master's, which is CIOS, the Central Institute of Educating of Sports Leaders, with an emphasis on soccer, on football. And, I'm probably going to be a gym teacher. And he goes, what do you think of the U.S.? So we're both looking out a window and go, wow, this is an unbelievable country. Okay, we'll keep going. A few months later, in January of '79, so a few months later, he calls me and he goes, you remember, Thomas, the beautiful plane ride over the Grand Canyon? I go, yes, Mr. Michels. I just signed with the LA Aztecs. There's a new league in the United States. I have one place for a cheap player. I give you $1,000 a month. You got to share a car with a American player and an apartment. And I need to know if you're going to come, yes or no, right now. So I look at my parents and they can hear a little bit what I'm saying. And I'm saying yes. So I thought I was going for an adventure, a pretty cool adventure, because I was the first Dutch player there. Fast forward, here comes Johan Cruyff and some other Dutch players. And that's how I ended up in the United States, thinking this is going to be a one-off deal, a 1 year, whatever. Here we are in 2023, almost 45 years later, and I became part of the fabric of football, soccer in the United States. So that's an incredible story that till this day I still tell. And the mere fact that, again, there was a league existing. I knew of some football here in the wild years when Dick Advocaat and Wim Hanegem, some Dutch players, went here for a few months. They brought in foreign players, foreign teams before the NASL even was.
There's international sort of soccer tournaments. It was called International Soccer League. It was nominal league. It was basically imported teams playing tournaments. Yeah.
So I became part of the rise and fall of the NASL, talking about the NASL, which, by the way, Rachel Violet has done a great documentary on that. And I've been in New York and a few other players promoting that and talking about
a former guest and a tremendous one at that.
Yeah, and Jim Trekker and I did a few things for her based on that documentary, which was very well put together. So here I am, a 21-year-old in Los Angeles, playing with a tremendous coach, and obviously eventually with a teammate that I followed to the Diplomats as well. So I played with Cruyff for 2 years in the NASL, but we became very, very close. I remember Johan, the owners were 2 lawyers, actually. Alan Rothenberg was one of the lawyers that owned the LA Aztecs, and they just couldn't pay Cruyff anymore. So they sold them basically, or traded them to the Diplomats. And a few games into the 1980 season, I get traded to the Diplomats as well. And I call Johan, and he goes, I'll pick you up at the airport. The whole family's there, the 3 kids. Jordi is like 4 or 5. Chantal and Cecile are the 2 daughters. And they go, just stay with us for a few days, find an apartment. Fast forward 5 months later, I'm still living with them on the 3rd floor next to the Rockefellers and the Kennedys. So I got some interesting stories about it as well. But I became very close to the family for the longest time. So those are fun memories, both on and off the field, and the influences going forward of some other Dutch greats that played for the Fort Lauderdale Strikers, the ability to be a roommate because I spoke fluent German with Gerd Mueller, with the Strikers, being able to party with the Rolling Stones in Studio 54, hanging out with George Best at Bestie's during my LA Aztecs times, and really enjoyed both the on and off the field, whatever the environment, not a culture, because soccer never will be entrenched in this in this environment or this society as it is in Central South and in Europe. But we've come a long way if you look at MLS, right, wrong, or indifferently. But when the league actually collapsed, most foreign players went back, and I said, I love this country, I want to stay here, and I want to give something back. So I was probably one of the first technical directors in the country. I became a high school coach, I became a college coach, and eventually I became a head coach for the Tampa Bay Mutiny in 1996. So that's just real quickly, how I got to MLS and eventually the U.S. men's national team, World Cup with Steve Sampson as the assistant coach in 98. I had just a tremendous ride.
So, all right, but before we leave Los Angeles for a second, number one, so the Aztecs, right? I mean, it's odd because when you and Arenas and Johan obviously showed up, right? I mean, this is a team that kind of doubled their attendance, yet the reality was you're playing in, I think, the Rose Bowl, right? Which is cavernous.
Correct.
What did you think you stepped into? Because I mean, I would argue the Aztecs were never really the most well-attended team in the league, despite all that star power.
No, that's correct. And in the Rose Bowl, even 20, 22, 25,000 on a rare occasion, if we played the Cosmos or some other teams who had a little bit more, was still very empty. But then fast forward, for instance, to 1980, when we played the Cosmos, RFK rocked. The place was packed, 60,000, 65,000. And Johan doubled the attendance there. It became even going forward, when I coached DC United, a real fortress. The stands were bouncing. But in LA, we weren't very relevant. We were relevant because in a hierarchy of sports, people know other big-time players, which means that we would hang out with the Lakers guys. We would go to the Dodger games. We had guys coming up front row watching Cruyff play, because at that time Johan was considered to be one of the best, or maybe the best in the world, in particular in the NASL when Pele obviously left. So we had some big-time actors, Dutch actors like Rutger Hauer. And so it was a very interesting, more off the field than I would say on the field. But for me, it was still special that each and every day I was able to pick the brain of one of the brightest former players, eventually coaches, managers, presidents of clubs. And that's why I think Cruyff is probably number one in the last century, because he was not only a great player, but also won something as a coach and directed Barcelona for a few years as well. The Cruyff Foundations, there are a lot of special things without a doubt. So I knew already then I wanted to be a coach because of my studies and my background. So I just soaked it up, and my coaching philosophy is pretty much steeped 90% in Rinus and Johan's philosophy, both on and off the field, was remarkable. Johan had like a notepad where he had showed me, and he had the years in there. So prior to them building La Masia, he had drawings of La Masia, how he wanted it, and him and Rinus pretty much built La Masia. And I remember the bottom of one page. So this is late 60s, early 70s, mid 70s, when he's very young still. And he's drawn towards architectural. And he shows me in the Netherlands, when you go through the canals, most houses have these roofs that are triangles. And he's talked about triangles in architecture. We got to put it, and I put that in my philosophy of playing, triangles all over the field. It was amazing how brilliant he was, and we were all influenced by a very interesting movement in Amsterdam, where he was from and I was from, and from a neighborhood where the provos, which were hippies on bikes basically, but hippies that were first in the field of science, first in the field of architecture, first in the field of a lot of brilliant artists, free thinkers, thinking outside of the box. Space was something. We could do something with space, and smaller spaces are even better, Johan always says. I love smaller spaces. And all that, here all of a sudden comes Ajax, with all these free creative thinkers because of their upbringing that now they can able to put on the field. And I was so intrigued by that. And I started doing some research and again, all those drawings and all those notepads he had at the bottom of the La Masia drawing, where he had even a diet room and a classroom, and size does not matter. If it wasn't for Johan, the Xavis, the Iniestas, the Messis of the world probably would never been at Barcelona, because he felt that the game was changing already to a faster, stronger player. But he believed still, first and foremost, that should be a technical player, a mobile player, a brilliant tactical or creative player. Incredible.
Yeah, the whole total soccer thing was just wondrous, and I arguably you could argue, Mickey, for its need to be returned, shall we say, to the mainstream. Given how tactical and often defensive, especially at the world level or the major competitive level, at the international level, it can be a bit turgid sometimes if it's played cynically. And this was the opposite of that. It was like true to its name, and it was actually fun and interesting to watch too, not only the global scale, but to even to bring some of those elements to the United States, where this North American Soccer League, star-spangled as it was, right? I mean, it was trying to break through. It was trying to be attractive to the American fan, and American fans attracted to offense, and action. No doubt. Right? So
most teams were very forward-thinking. Most teams put their money into attacking players. Most teams, in the Cosmos is a great example, although they assembled big names, but all these big names could play. Starting with Franz Beckenbauer. You can't find a better guy to start the attack with Bogey in midfield, beautiful, graceful left footer. Obviously Giorgio can score, but if you look at the strikers, at that time the all-time scorer in World Cup history, Gerd Muller, the George Bests of the world, Trevor Francis in his heyday. Vancouver brought over some English players, but all based on attacking flair, most and foremost. Hudson in Seattle, our own Ray Hudson in Fort Lauderdale, Bernd Hulstenbein, Elias Figueroa. If you do a Wikipedia search on Elias Figueroa, he's considered to be better than Beckenbauer. He won the South American Player of the Year when he played in Brazil. The majority of his, and I played with him for 2 years. They consider him in the top 3 all-time center backs ever. He played for the strikers, and the list goes on and on and on of Carlos Alberto, at that time the best overlapping right fullback in the world. So they put a conscious effort into trying to make this a very attacking, entertaining league. Unfortunately, you can't build from the top down. That's why in the end it obviously crumbled. But yes, I was amazed, and I was a number 6, 4-6. So I ended up having to mark mostly the most creative 10s on the other teams. Mikkels was, tell us that's your opponent. And we're all like, I'm going, what? I got to chase George Best down again, which I did, by the way, in 81. If you go to NESL Goals of the Year, Bestie just turns everybody inside out.
It was that game against San Jose. That's right. It was like a slow motion kind of thing, and
right. I recover like 2 times, and he still nutmegs me and scores. It becomes the goal of the year. I mean, amazing. It really was.
So, all right. So let's talk about the NASL generally then while we're on it, because I want to get to a bunch of other specific topics along this line. But how would you characterize the NASL, right? I mean, you're in it, you're playing. There's lots of quality players coming in. Some of them, frankly, imported for the summer and still going back to Europe to collect their major paychecks and stuff. But obviously others, perhaps, I've heard it from many past guests and stuff, that arguably this either rejuvenated their career or became their career with this sort of bright, sparkly new terrain to be, tilled. But it was clearly not what you were used to in the European circles, right? Because you're selling the game to a completely foreign, if you will, audience here.
Yeah. And I'm telling you, most of the top guys that I played with had a very keen understanding that they were here not just to play the game they love and make some money, and Johan in particular, for a year, he had a show once a week to explain the beautiful game of football. John Feinstein, who wrote incredible books afterwards, one of the great authors, they gave him the task to follow Johan. So he went on every away trip, and we're talking about the Washington Post, said, hey, listen, we got something here. This is a new sport that's really trying to grow. On the surface, that brought in some of the best players in the world. We have to follow this. The business structure wasn't great at the end, but Gert went out of his way to do clinics and expose. And then it could be as 4 World Cups as well. He on road trips would spend time with South American younger coaches or players and things like that. There were some that didn't care much about that, but the bigger boys certainly did. And Johan was distraught when it finally collapsed. He really did, because the big guys, not only did they enjoy being part of this on the field, but it was so refreshing for them. Johan could finally, with his family, walk through Georgetown, and not too many people recognized him. He said, Thomas, in Barcelona, we couldn't get out of our house. So that was another reason what you just stated, Tim, that these guys found almost a second few years while they were, somewhat not over the hill, but a little bit older, due to the fact that they really enjoyed the both on and off the field experience in this country. Johan made a point in every road trip that we had to do something cultural, and because he just would explain to us, guys, we're in Vancouver. Have you ever been in Vancouver? I know. I just did some research. In Vancouver, if you look left, you see the ocean. If you look right, you see actually the White Mountains. We don't see that in the Netherlands or in Barcelona.
Might as well take advantage of it, right?
Yeah, no, it was really cool. He was really, really into it. Wim Jansen, also 74 World Cup, Feyenoord, was my teammate and my roommate. And the same thing. They loved it, and they later became, in their own rights, very good coaches. So they were already teachers, leaders, great players to start with. But they also were at that time, for me in particular, tremendous teachers about their philosophy, which was based on technical, attacking football, not cynical. Teaching defending is easy, fuck that. Let's go immediately in the final third. Let's be creative, chance creation. There was no XGs and that kind of stuff. It was really, as Johan said, the game is really simple, but nobody plays the game simply, and we're romantics. That's why we lost in 3 World Cup finals, because we wanted, even in the final, we wanted to win in the beautiful style, instead of just saying, you know what, after 1-0, 5th minute, Germany 74, let's close up. No, we just had wave of attacks, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Müller scores 2. Thanks for coming. Same in Argentina, although Argentina probably deserved that one. And here I am watching 74, 78. And some of these guys that are playing in World Cup finals, like Ricardo Villa, Ozzy Alonso, become teammates for me later, including Cruyff, Wim Jansen, Ruud Krol, obviously played here. Robbie Rensenbrink played in Seattle or Portland. The list goes on. Wim Surby was my teammate, obviously. So there was just some big players that came here for an adventure, but also to help to help. I don't know how to phrase that. To see if we can instill some kind of passion, not only in defense, but more in general terms. And I think we failed to a certain extent. I think it was sexy to go to for a while. It was a little bit of a fad, I think. I was caught up into it. It was a young crowd, partying crowd most of the time, everywhere you went. For 3 or 4 years, most of these clubs outdrew the Nets, the Jets, the Giants, whatever, the Cosmos, 50, 60,000 people. But somehow it just totally crumbled in a very short amount of time. And obviously, television had a lot to do with that.
Well, it worked for me. So you got one person at least. So,
Hey, listen, in 98, I was the assistant coach, and I would talk to Marcelo Balboa, Eric Winalda, Kobe Jones, John Harkes, and those guys. They all grew up between 8 to 12 when their dad would take them to soccer games. I mean, the Cosmos was really important for that 1994 group of most of the U.S. team that fell in love with the game because they watched the NESL. Now, it was a small group, but we touched nerves within those guys that they became later guys that represented the U.S. because they fell in love with Beckenbauer, Cruyff, whoever it might be, Bestie.
All right, what's this? Game Time? Fantastic. Hey, buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. With killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can snag the tickets without the stress with the Game Time app. And I will tell you, the Game Time app has gotten me out of a couple of jams on more than a few occasions. I'll tell you, a couple of weeks back, I travel fairly often for work. I was stuck in New York. I had dinner plans fall through during a business trip. I was leaving the next morning, but had some time on my hands. And what's a sports guy like me to do? Well, scouring around to see if there are any events going on. And sure enough, the Knicks were playing the Nets at home at the world's most famous arena. So about an hour before the game, I fired up the Game Time app and found a decently priced ticket. I won't tell you what the people around me paid for their ticket, but it certainly wasn't nearly as expensive as theirs. And I got to watch the Knicks in a rare moment of amazingness, kick the snot out of the Nets. But Game Time is the place to get your last-minute tickets. They've got a tremendous set of deals, flash deals they call them, and last-minute tickets. They're easy to find and buy for just about every kind of event you want, sports and entertainment and music, that kind of stuff. The images, the seat views are just perfect. They're great. That's always like the big conundrum when you're looking at a seating chart. You have no idea where you're going to be, what your view is going to be like. And Game Time's got probably the best imagery that I've seen of any of the ticket sites out there. And of course, they've got a lowest price guarantee, including event cancellation protection. So you're going to be covered in case. As a matter of fact, that the Game Time guarantee means that you'll always get the best price. And if you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Don't believe me? Try it for yourself. Download the Game Time app now, create an account, and then on us, use the code GOODSEATS for $20 off of your first purchase. Again, that's the Game Time app, and it's also you can check them also out at gametime.co. But get the app, download the app now, create an account, and use the code GOODSEATS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply for sure. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. It's Game Time. Thank you, Game Time, for your sponsorship of this week's episode. And now, back to our conversation. Tell me about what are your recollections and likes, dislikes of the various rule changes in the NASL? So 35-yard line, the shootout, the Newman scoring system, right? 6 points for a win, and you get a goal for every point for every goal you score. Even if you're losing, you get points, and sudden death overtime. Well, what of that stuff did you like or not like from those exploits? Any of those good and maybe should be worthwhile keeping again, or what?
Well, I mean, listen, you're talking to an old school guy. And I was in the locker rooms 8 to 10 years younger than Johan Cruyff, Wim Janssen, George Best. You know, I mean, I came at a very young age, at 21. So these were all traditionalists. So the traditionalists, you don't screw with the game. In saying that, Johan would make once in a while a comment and say, wow, we got a lot of space in midfield. Because, you know, if we play against the strikers, which is true, because Gert Miller became my roommate, Gert is just going to hang out at the 35-yard line because he's too lazy or he's too old to go back to the midfield line. And when I later confronted Gert with that a year later, when the Dips actually folded in 1980 after we came back from a Far Eastern tour, I asked him that. He said, Thomas, it added a year to my career because I didn't have to run back to the midfield line. So I could save 60-yard doggies throughout the game basically by hanging out. But, you know, in the end, it forced defenders then to stay back with them. There was so much space in midfield. It didn't look like the real game. The only thing that I think we could institute in MLS and even in the World Cup or anywhere else is the shootout. The shootout to me is the fans loved it, obviously. Closer to, you know, that the goalkeeper has more of a fair chance. You get 5 seconds. You see a lot of different ways in which guys can beat the goalkeeper. Beckenbauer used to on the turf flip his first ball up in the air with his toes.
I was at that game where he did that, and Carlos Alberto followed it, and Minnesota Kicks, that 78 series.
Correct. There you go.
Never forget it.
And the goalkeeper would come and go, oh, he could just now, you know, he could lop it over me. So now he's frozen a little bit. And if he came, Beckenbauer would go, whoop. If he didn't game, the second touch was with the chest, and then the third one was on the ground, but it froze the goalkeeper. Some guys went in an angle, you know. Some guys tried to get around the goalkeeper in 5 seconds, which wasn't easy.
Were you particularly good at it?
I actually was, and was more a hard-nosed Johan Neeskens type, you know. And every team at that time needed 2 or 3 of those guys that Cruyff could kick. You know, like in hockey, I watch the NHL right now. If you're a star guy, I'll put you in the boards. And besides the fact that I had a pretty good technical understanding, but I knew my role real well. And Migos always said, Thomas, if you're the fittest guy in the team and you have the right mentality and you get it and you play simple, you don't turn the ball over, find Johan as often as you can, job done. Number 9, if he doesn't score, job done. Yeah, it was a little bit old school, but I was very good at that. So I took one in the first game. And what I did was I would play it fairly far in front of me. So it would end up 22, 24 yards out. And while the goalkeeper was still moving, my second touch was inside of the foot, boop, near post with a little bit of a bend. And the goalkeeper, since he was still in his stride going forward, was caught most of the time. He was never able to set himself. And I didn't really think about that. It was more out of fear. I was like, oh my God, what do I do with my second touch? Well, let me just play it hard on the ground and a little bit of bend, and I scored probably 90% of my shootout goals. You know, so yeah, that to me is still something that people need to consider. Although, yeah, should a World Cup final end in penalty? Should a whatever?
Yeah, I agree. Especially on the international level, I'm frankly, I'm a big. It's interesting. We talked to Paul Gardner a long time ago when we first got this show going, and he kind of said he thought that the shootout and the 35-yard line were interesting, but definitely bent the rules of the game per se. The one thing that he actually thought was the best was the point system, because all you're doing is incentivizing scoring goals, even if you're losing, to at least get some points out of the deal, and you wouldn't fuss with the game per se, right?
Correct. No, yeah, I mean there's something to be said for that, you know, no doubt about it. And I mean that was also done a little bit to make the score lines bigger, because a lot of people looked at score lines of 0-0 or 0-0, as people would say sarcastically, the socialist sport from Europe. What is it doing here? Nobody scores, and that's why people thought indoor was going to be the game going forward. That didn't happen either, and then people got a better understanding of the game itself. But I thought initially that was done, like most other rules, to engage with the crowd. And maybe, you know, you look at the newspaper, oh, wait a minute, 8-6, 9-5, 7-4, they got 6 points. You know, I mean, that would have made sense from that standpoint to sell it a little bit more. And it would also make sense. You're right. Listen, we're down 3-0. We've defended the whole game. It hasn't worked. Our game plan to sneak out of here with keeping the 0, low block, park the bus, and get one on the counter. Might as well go for broke and see if we can score one so we get some points out of this game. I agree with Paul and you that would make sense. Now, if you even look after the NASL, a lot of leagues, came up, and I coached in some of those leagues. Won a championship in, what was it, 99 or whatever, with the Fort Lauderdale Strikers. Well, No Lemon owned it, and they had crazy stuff. They did like with hockey. You had 2 minutes where somebody had to come off. Only one defender in the 18-yard box on corners. If there was a 5th or 6th foul, an attacker could run from the midfield line, and after 3 seconds, a whistle would go, and the rest of the opposing team, could try to chase him and see if they could tackle him before he could score. I mean, shit like that, it's great.
Yeah, and we've actually talked to Pablo Maurer, who's a writer for The Athletic, and he's actually been on this sort of personal quest, because I think Tony Miola, this is the USISL, I think it was. I think Tony Miola was with the Long Island Rough Riders at the time, was remembered this as well. It's sort of like a thunder herd, so to speak, right? Where it's like the ball goes and then everybody else. But I think Pablo is on this quest to find some video of that. And nobody's been able to sort of surface that yet, because it does sound pretty crazy by comparison, right? But I don't know. These rules, by the way, they think they've mellowed over time. I do think some of them are worth experimentation, maybe at the USL level or whatever MLS Next is and that kind of stuff. But But let me ask.
I mean, I agree with you, but I was part of that. Tony actually played for me one year, just before the Rough Riders or after the Rough Riders. I can't remember. And he was part. So Tony was very much part of the 2 years where it was a little crazy in terms of these owners trying to. And these owners were No Lemon, Chuck Blazer. Chuck owned the Miami Sharks, I think it was called. Tab Ramos played for him. You had Peter Bridgewater out in the West Coast with San Jose, where you had before MLS Eric Winalda and those guys playing for him. Because there's nothing else for these guys to do.
Well,
and these owners were thinking really outside of the box. Yeah, no doubt.
Well, I want to get to that in 1 second, but you did mention indoor, and I can't let you. And I do want to segue to the managerial stuff. Indoor. So you had various tastes of the indoor game when you were here. You played the NASL version with the Aztecs that first, I guess, winter season. I guess it was in the Forum.
Yeah, no. Yeah. We played in the Forum. Yeah.
Right. And then
I got my second taste in 1980, the winter, where I was in Fort Lauderdale, where we played out in the Sunrise Auditorium, where normally only rock bands would play in the middle of the Everglades. There's nothing built there. Yeah, right. So I played 2 years of the NASL, and then that crumbled, and then it became a mixture. And then I played for the Chicago Sting for Willie Roy in the new league, basically. So against the Blast.
Yeah. So I mean, what was your memories of the indoor game? Number one, did you like it or not? Number two, do you remember any differences between the NASL version, which seemed to be like trying to catch up for? The irony is that at the NASL, before you even came over here, right, had these little tournaments in the early 70s, and then this MISL thing came and made a real league out of the indoor game, and then the NASL kind of caught up and stuff. But I don't know if you remember, sort of, there was a year or two where they were both like directly competing with each other. What was your remembrance of it? Did you like the game? Was the NASL version better or worse than the MSL version? Any of that stuff, or was it all a blur?
Most players hated it. So I would say the MISL version was much better. They really scouted players that were apt. I mean, they just turned outdoor teams into indoor teams. And let's face it, I wasn't a highly technical player, and the concept of hitting balls against boards and stuff like that. Now the crowds were into it. You would go to certain places in Middle America, and they would fireworks and smoke bombs and things like that. So that made it somewhat attractive. But the game itself, even the Karl-Heinz Granitsas of the world that played it for a few years, the Padomarics of the world, who were very good at it, didn't particularly like it. The turf. And in those days, we would play in the hockey arenas most of the time, and we would just put the turf on the ice. In Chicago, all three teams, the basketball team, the hockey team, and the soccer team, and we would outdraw both for a year or two.
Stadium. The Chicago Stadium.
Till Michael Jordan came. But it was the stadium in the old neighborhood, and the stands were straight up. It was like the Bombonera almost. So in terms of atmosphere, it was great. Outside of that, the MISL, obviously starting with the Arrows and then San Diego, and the NASL owners. This was their last grab. The outdoor game was dying, so they felt, okay, we got to all jump into this thing here with the Minnesota Strikers. We went to the finals one year against San Diego and lost in 7, and they had Zungel and Julie V, and they had a good team, by the way. So some of them made a trade out of it, and some were very good at it. Most didn't particularly care for it. The NASL guys I know that I played against in outdoor games, it wasn't not a paycheck, but there wasn't a lot about, let me teach the indoor game to some inner city kids. That was done and dusted.
Yeah, so this is a good segue because, look, as the 80s sort of rolled on and stuff, right, not only was the indoor game, which was supposedly going to be the future of the sport in this country, and the NASL dying, there was this sort of very dark period of time. As a fan, I can attest, but I got to imagine as a player, you kind of had to reinvent. Yes, you're playing for, the APSL version of the Fort Lauderdale Strikers, the name at least carrying on, but you're also looking at, your beginnings of your managerial career as well, almost as I don't want to call it a side job, but I mean, you're doing all that you're reinventing yourself with all due respect, right? And
that to me was the most important. My high school, college, where I had balls in the back of my truck, I had to set out the cones. There was no assistant coaches. Even the league you just referenced, although I had a great team, I had the three amigos, Ricardo Alonso, Marcelo Carrera, another Argentinian in there, Victor Moreland, Barry Wallace, Arnie Mauser, Tony Miola, and goal.
Those are all great names. Yeah.
When we won it that year, but for me, and it was not a lot of money, obviously, that those 2 or 3 years in these lower leagues, understanding what it takes to, to put your squares out and how to build a practice from simple to complex and steeped with my philosophy. And then later running into MLS, where all of a sudden you get assistant coaches, and early on we had a little data analysis, which obviously helped in certain ways. Yeah, those were great learning years for me, to put it all together. And one of the reasons I think Farouk Qureshi looked at my resume and said, wow, this guy's done it all, from grassroots to high school to college, to some professional or semi-pro, if you want to call it. And he had a lot of bigger names for the Mutiny, but he chose me because of the fact that I did my homework, and my background as a teacher helped in that endeavor as well. And I speak my languages too, which is good. That's as somebody from the Netherlands, small country. We're great traders, over the many centuries. So we got to speak our languages in order to survive in the Netherlands. Those were important years for me. No doubt.
Did you ever think that in the late 80s, you're really keeping it alive, both, you're beginning your managerial career. Hell, you were double dipping with the Strikers at that time, whatever league they were in those years, which I'm sure was always a challenge as well. I mean, you're playing, but you're also coaching. And I got to think that when you heard that the United States was getting the World Cup, and then the subsequent information that FIFA was only giving the U.S. the cup if they were to start their own professional league again, that had to be a wonderful, that must have been the light at the end of the tunnel for you, especially.
Yeah, it was. And then you realize that you've done some really important things, that in late 94, early 95, Sunil Gulati calls me and says, Thomas, you've been entrenched as one of the few people, and Dave Durr was with the Colorado Foxes at that time. You guys know a lot of players in this country, so why don't you help us setting up all these clinics in all these different cities, most of them that will have MLS teams, and go with Ivan Gazidis, to South America and Europe and try to sign some players for this league. You know, if I'm not being part of the semi-pro leagues, finally somebody recognized all the hard work I've done. So that also laid the groundwork, I'm sure, with the Tampa Bay Mutiny being a league-owned team that Sunil might have. I'm not so sure, actually, I think about it, that Sunil might have nudged Farouk and say, hey, Thomas has been in the fold already. Would only make sense. He's spoken to Alpibia Valderrama already a few times when he went with Ivan down to South America. That's the first time I'm actually putting 2 and 2 together here with Sunil and Farouk and MLS and the work that Dave Durr and I particularly did leading up to the launch of 96.
And what was your feeling about the league before, during, and then at the end of 1996? I mean, you were the coach of the year. I mean, the Mutiny were, they were on fire, except for in the playoffs, obviously. But you were probably the best team in the regular season. There had to be some kind of validation on some level. Did you think the league was was here to stay? And I mean, or were you worried that the NASL experience might happen again?
Yes and no.
Early to judge.
I mean, there was obviously a lot of the single entity and all those things, and I stayed away from all of that. I lived a little bit in the moment, to be real honest with you. I was looking ahead till I went to New England, and just before I went to DC. So in '99, I won a championship with DC United, and I think I called Sunil at one time to make a trade, and he said, Thomas, I'm not so sure if this league is going to make it. In particular, your owners haven't emptied up. Because these guys had to spend a lot of money in the first few years to keep this thing going, hoping that at the back end they would make some money, which I'm sure they're doing right now. Looking just at the franchise fees, the way they've gone up. But there were some tricky times. If it wasn't for the Anshoots, the Hunts, that thing could have crumbled. Now they hung on to it, and smartly so, learned from some of the poor decisions that the NASL made. Didn't want to, that was the only thing that pissed me off a little bit, is they didn't want to talk about the NASL. I'm so glad that fans in a lot of cities, when they got teams, that they wanted to be the Timbers, the Sounders, the Whitecaps, and the list goes on as well. So showing that the NASL obviously had still a tremendous impact off the field. I knew this thing was really serious when I got to DC United, and the way Kevin Payne and Bruce Arena put that franchise together, and talked to Kevin, rest in peace, KP, about the longevity of this league, because he was pretty much one of the founders. With him and Sunil were very tight, and Kevin had a great mind for the game, cared about the game, was a brilliant salesman, and put probably a role model franchise together that a lot of other clubs that came into the league thereafter looked at their own facilities, keeping the administration and the technical part, keep them together. A sound philosophy, fighting for the fear that he wanted to be DC United, a particular logo. Don't give me the bullshit Nike, like we had with the Mutiny, for instance, Mutant Bet. So he was very influential on that, and
not a fan of the original. Although you're wearing the jersey as we record this, though.
Because it's
nostalgic about it.
It's nostalgia, exactly. It's signed by the whole team, and I got.
It wasn't as bad as the Clashes, San Jose Clashes. Metro, I know. The Metro Stars is even worse. God.
When Nike rolled it out, we all the traditionalists. We had a meeting. I remember vividly with all the coaches. There was 10 of them. Lothar Osiander, Bruce. Myself,
Eddie Fermani,
Ziggy, Eddie, who was falling asleep, and we had the guys from the Metro Stars, and these guys were talking about talking about. Well, you remember baseball? They put a midget in the play. How about the goalkeeper can't be bigger than 5'5"? And I'm telling you, if it wasn't for Kevin and Sunil, and the Hunts, quite frankly, who know the game, that categorically said no. But some of those rules that we've seen throughout that we just talked about, some of these guys seriously wanted to implement that starting in 1996. It didn't happen, but some of those early meetings were unbelievable.
And do you think that's because of the somewhat still raw taste in people's mouths of the old NASL, and they didn't want to repeat, or they wanted to completely distance themselves from it?
No doubt about it. That was the underlying tone. It wasn't said in that many words, but nobody wanted to come close to what the NASL had tried to do in terms of rule changes and mimic that. Because Sunil said that's a death wish, guys. We there's no way we can do that. Whatever.
Okay, we'll quickly sort of get to the last things here. So
you got
barely
10 minutes. Then then this thing is gonna die.
Got it. Okay. So thank you. We all right. So tell me then when the league contracted, which is in the early aughts, right? It's 2002-ish or so. Yep. And Tampa Bay was one of those teams to go. What did you think then? Did you think that it was a goner for sure, or this was just a step in the ultimate right direction? Were you worried?
Yeah, I was worried because I saw a little bit deja vu signs, from the NASL, and I remember spending time with Joe Robbie, who loved to be on the road, and I had a keener sense then of, off the field stuff and how to build franchise, how to keep it alive and things. And in Minneapolis, he moved the franchise to Minneapolis because you play indoors and outdoors. Who else in the down here, or DC was basically Werblin, and I got very close to Tom Werblin, so we spent time with Sonny Werblin talking about the league, quite frankly, and he pulled the plug in 1980, and saw certain signs that's whatever. I saw the same signs. The worry of the owners were the ones that I can't speak on single entity versus non-single entity. I can't speak about all that kind of stuff. The lawsuits, obviously, that they've continued to win against the old NASL, in particular the Cosmos and the guy that runs FC Miami, the field exclusion and stuff like that. So I think that the Crafts, the Hunts, the Anschutzes felt very, very good about the direction of this league based on the blueprint that they put out from a business standpoint, and they slowly build on that. And I must say, they've even surprised me how far we've come, and we're scratching maybe only the surface, in terms of more teams, and even in very poor times, there's still a lot of people out there with deep pockets that are willing to invest, be it San Diego, Las Vegas, but there's other cities too that can't wait to jump on the bandwagon if they can.
All right, well let's wrap.
But yeah, we went through a tough stretch there, and if it wasn't for, let's face it, for Anschutz, that thing would have in 2002 would have gone down the tubes. You're right.
And I think that's for the documentary that ultimately has to be done. All right, so let me ask you this then, with a mind toward the future, and I must confess, when I watch the MLS games that feature the Fusion, there I go. I can't believe that. Inter Miami. Oh, but there's a Freudian slip.
It certainly is. We're talking about retraction. Yeah.
No, sorry about that. Yeah. I must admit, though, when I do watch on Apple TV Plus, I do go to the alternate audio so that I can hear you, because you're a lot more.
Oh, cool.
Frankly.
Cool.
And I wish more people would do that, by the way. And they should do more of those.
And Phil Shane is now on board as well. So
fantastic. Well, Phil Shane, one of the original voices of the old ESPN.
There you go, Tim. Right? There you go.
So let me ask you this. I'm going to end with the Chivas USA question in a second, but given what you just laid out, what is your sense of the pro game in the United States, given all that you've been through here, and now the precipice that MLS is upon now? I mean, perhaps 32 teams before, all is said and done. I worry that there may be. Well, is it the best of times? I mean, great stadiums for sure. I think the play is certainly getting better.
Yeah, no, yeah.
But I mean, there's a lot of sports, right now, a lot of private equity and stuff. And is it too much, maybe, or do you worry in the back of your mind? Given what you've been through?
Only time will tell. We got the Gold Cup obviously coming up. We got Copa America in 2024. We got the World Cup. I'll be surprised if the Women's World Cup is not here, because FIFA's not stupid. This is the best country where they can make the most money. We got the Olympics here, where soccer, each and every Olympics becomes more important. The biggest players want to take part in the Olympics. I'm scared too. That might be too much. We get more international teams again due to COVID now coming back and being here in the summer, including Wrexham. That's a great story. You see Watts investing in Burnley. You see in the top 10 in England, 6 are American ownership. You look at John Textor investing in Crystal Palace, a Belgian team, Lyon, Brazilian team. And I spoke to John. He's a good friend of mine. And John said, Thomas, if it's up to all these equity guys that I've convinced that soccer's the way to go, I can buy 10 more clubs with the money they're willing to invest. So,
yeah, I don't know how good that is, though, right? I mean, like,
it scares me a little bit.
Yeah, like the Man City model, right? I get it, right? But it's like, I don't know if I want one corporation, if you will, owning a team in Australia, a team in MLS, a team in I mean, I get it, but I also worry about sort of the soul, perhaps, of the sport. Without
a doubt. I mean, look at my own club right now. My own club was initially owned by 2 guys that sold it for $10 because they loved the game to somebody else that lived in Amsterdam as well. And now you get all these conglomerates coming in. The soul is slowly dying, and it's more about business, equity firms, countries. Are not as much oligarchs right now due to the crisis in Russia and Ukraine, but yes, it is scary. The bubble sooner or later is going to burst. Although Sky continues to raise the money in terms of TV rights, so the owners are going, okay, this is pretty good. Look at the Glazers; they invested with borrowed money, basically paper money, and they're going to walk away with $6-7 billion after 15 years. It's insane. That's the Qatari royal family. It's a country owning PSG. You look at City. You look at, potentially Saudi Arabia coming in more and more to play as well, looking at 2030, Messi, Ronaldo, and the money that's splurged around. Yeah, the soul is slowly taken away from that. And then you go back into the pro and rel discussion as well, but
let's end on that one. I know your battery's going to run out in a second, but in terms of the future, I mean, I know you're still very much part of the American soccer mix. We only scratched the surface of other conversations we could have maybe some other time, I hope. But what do you think of pro rel? Do you think indeed that would a regular season more, all that kind of stuff, or is it kind of just
historical soul-like thing? I'm pro rel. On the other hand, for a city, for a Providence, for all the fans that are mostly for 100 years, from family to family to family, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th generation. That's my only club. When I grew up, it was Ajax. I was born and raised in Amsterdam. In saying that, I look at some of these, I played in relegation games because in the Netherlands, also at the youth level, you go to an Eredivisie or you drop down as well. It doesn't make the game better. I look right now at all these young Americans, and Aronson is not playing anymore because he's a technical player. So Garcia went for a stronger guy that's faster, better on set pieces. McKinney gets taken off most games. Musa starts. Fights relegation, but is taken off also around the 60th minute. And I know that from my own past experiences, case in point, and I don't know if it's a done deal, but if you at Leeds right now, Leeds is going from Bielsa to a guy that only is there to keep the 0 and win 1-0. So in terms of development for players, I don't think that pro and relegation is good, because when things get tight, most coaches go to veteran players. Most coaches go to being sarcastic. Most coaches will drop a forward and go to a full 4-2 to first and foremost keep the 0 and hope they can win one or tie one on the road. So it's a double-edged sword, to be real honest with you. And I'm not so sure if people say, well, I mean, we don't have any meaningful games. It's very interesting to see that a guy that scores a hat-trick against Real Madrid, that played in the MLS, just try to figure it out. And he scored 6 in the last 4, I think, has said one of the great things he said a single entity in his interview after the game is that I had to prep for the playoffs. Now, I know 8 teams or 10 teams or 16 teams make it, and you can say, well, the remainder of those teams that are not in it with 5, 6, 7, 8 games to go, but they can still play attacking football. A lot of times the coaches say, you know what, I'm going to play young players. I got nothing else to lose. These 3 older guys won't be here next year anyway. I'm not so sure if it's from a player development standpoint, if it's good for players in terms of excitement and getting a city to buy into it. I'm not so sure in the minds of most sports fans here that aren't true soccer fans that you and I know in other countries, if it really matters. And let's be real honest, playoffs is part of the American sports culture. These billionaires are not going to say, I'm going to invest this kind of money and then drop to the USL. No chance.
Yeah, I look, at the end of the day, the answer is sadly money, and wherever the money wants to go is probably where it goes. I just worry that there's too much money. It's very, it's I don't know, private equity and all that kind of stuff. I guess I worry, and it's probably born from what we talked about before, right? And you and I have both experienced this in vastly different ways. We've seen the heady times, we've seen it all go away, and then we've seen it being rebuilt and even stumble along the way to where it is now. And arguably, I don't think if we had this conversation 30 years ago, none of us would have believed soccer-specific stadiums, that ESPN would be carrying soccer games as well as covering sports and the scores and people actually talking. And the crowds and all that kind of the culture, right? I don't think you would have even imagined that 30 years ago. So there has to be absolutely something said for all of that. And you're a pioneer. So I appreciate you taking just at least a few minutes for this, because, you've gone through the crucible, if you will, and you should be rewarded with some of those fruits for sure. And I hope it keeps going, but but not too crazily,
I echo all of those sentiments, Tim, and thanks for having me on. It's been a pleasure, and talking to somebody that goes all the way back and puts some thought into what's right and wrong. We need more people like you, and you're like a historian, so that's you're pretty brilliant the way you just segue from the fusion to the earthquakes, from Bestie to Trevor Francis. Thank you. It was a fun ride for me here.
Well, I appreciate it. Maybe some other time we'll have another chance to do it, maybe in person. And then at that point, I'll ask you about Chivas USA. But until then, we'll leave it to that. Okay. All right. Many, many thanks to the one, the only Thomas Rongen. I hope this is just the first of hopefully a bunch of other conversations we can have. He's clearly got many, many, many more stories to tell, and hopefully there's some opportunities down the road, maybe as the lead up and the actual formal promotion for the feature film comes about, and perhaps other things that we certainly have been thinking about doing some live events and some live interviews and that kind of stuff with not a studio audience, but an audience, actual audience. But we'll see, and we'll keep our fingers crossed that he enjoyed the experience enough this time. Let's see. The movies, plural, that you should seek out. One is effectively out there, kind of hard to find, I think, on purpose, but was the original, the 2014 Next Goal Wins documentary. You heard the promo. You can see some clips on YouTube, as well as the official trailer in its visual form. And I think, again, you want to look for the DVDs, go to your local library, but keep an eye out. I cannot imagine that that documentary will not officially, once again, I believe, find a home on a streaming service, as the new movie, the actual dramatic / comic feature, comes out later this year, sometime later in 2023. Not quite sure. We'll try to let you know if we find out sooner than the average bear out there. But it is also called Next Goal Wins. That trailer, of course, is also available out there wherever you find trailers. Perhaps the preview channel on your streaming fast channel lineup, on your Samsung TV Plus or your Vizio platform, or on YouTube. You can find it there too. And again, that's starring Michael Fassbender, Elizabeth Moss. I think Will Arnett's in this movie. A whole bunch of other great folks. And again, directed by the Academy Award-winning Taika Waititi. And it's, I think, based on what I've seen thus far, is going to be quite something. And hopefully Thomas gets a whole sort of another round of attention. And it's interesting, too, because in my thanks to him, again, this is a couple of weeks back when we recorded this show, I suggested that he think about doing an autobiography because he's just so full of stories. And not only did he say thank you for that idea, but he also sent me a pitch deck for apparently another documentary that's in the works that is basically devoted to his story, his life story. And it's called, I think right now, the tentative title is called The Curious Tale of Thomas Rongen. So if you're interested in helping finance that movie, boy, we would love to for sure. Just send us some email and we'll get you connected for sure. Our email address, not only for that, but for all things, is hello@goodseatsstillavailable.com. By all means, please. We're happy to hear your comments, both specifically and generally, about our various topics and stuff. While you're online, why don't you bookmark and visit regularly our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com. All of our episodes are posted there for your streaming pleasure. Of course, the best way is to make sure that you subscribe to us wherever you get podcasts, literally wherever you get podcasts. If you have a player or a service that you use and you somehow cannot find Good Seats Still Available in your feeds to record and or download or stream, please let us know, because we aim to be just about everywhere you can find them. And so far, so good. Knock on wood. Let's see what else. Our social media feeds. You can follow us on Instagram at Good Seats Still Available. You can follow us on Facebook at Good Seats Still Available. And you can also follow us on Twitter at Good Seats Still. What else? Our pal Jerry Payne Audio Excellence. Thank you, sir. As always, a tip of the, I guess, the Atlanta Braves cap, because I know he's a big Atlanta Braves fan. So let's just keep him hoping, I guess, for postseason excitement this year. And we thank you, great listeners, for supporting the show. As always, please tell your friends. Please rate and review us where you can, and help the algorithm. Why don't you? We'll get more people to saddle up and listen for whatever we've got in the weeks ahead, or even the weeks past, for God's sakes. Thanks for supporting us, and we appreciate it to no end. We'll see you next week, God willing. Until then, please take care, and thank you.